Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first meeting of the Overgrown Scrutiny Committee for Housing. Excuse me. Could I please invite the committee to confirm the appointment of Councillor Richard Seaborn as Chairman of the Housing Overgrown Scrutiny Group for the Council Year 2019-20. Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much.
So the second item is to appoint the Vice Chairman. So I'd like to invite the committee to confirm the appointment of Councillor Fulton Marriott as Vice Chairman of this committee for next year.
Agreed.
Excellent, thank you. So one of the privileges of this committee is that we get to work with tenants very closely, and we have a tradition of co-opting a couple of members from the tenants panel to be standing members of the committee. And we have two nominations for that. Terry Daubney, who's currently the chair of the tenants panel, and Dennis Smith, who's new to this and quite nervous, but he's very welcome should we agree to co-opt these gentlemen. And also we have a substitute should neither of these gentlemen be available, Gillian Martin. So can I propose these three people to be co-opted to
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Right, so the business proper starts with approval or not of the minutes from the last meeting, which will probably be fairly alien document to most of you. There are some people who are on the committee before. Can I propose that those those minutes are confirmed? Is that a correct record of that?
Agreed. I was at the bus.
Right, happy with that. Right, Kim, do you have any apologies for absence?
Yes, Councillor Goodrich has apologised, and Councillor Coburn was supposed to be substituted, but she's obviously not managed to arrive. She has been at a meeting all day, so she did say there could be an issue.
Right, okay, so we might be one short. Okay, thank you for that. Have there been any so item 6, have there been any declarations of
No,
interest?
I haven't received any.
Right. Does anyone have anything relating to the agenda today that they wish to declare as agenda? No, okay, thank you. Very good progress. Do we have any questions from members of the
Don't
public?
know.
Do we have any questions from members?
No, none submitted.
Right, this is where the entertainment starts. Most of us are strangers to each other, so I very much welcome the opportunity to go around the room very quickly, 1 minute, plus or minus a few seconds, personal introductions, what your experience is before coming to the council, who you represent, and the kind of things that you want to get out of this committee and bring to the committee. So I was encouraged by the scrutiny officer to set the ball rolling with a carefully timed introduction. So plus or minus 10 seconds a minute each. So I'll start if I may. I'm Richard Seaborn. I represent Bramley, Westbridge and Hascombe. This is my second term on Waverley Council. During the first term, I had the privilege of serving on this committee and its precursor, because this used to be a subcommittee of another Overgrown Scrutiny Committee before. I've served on housing for 4 years, and I've been trusted to chair a couple of working groups during that time, which gave me a huge amount of satisfaction working with the tenants, the officers, and colleagues cross-party. That's the strength of this committee. We throw away all our differences and knuckle down for the benefit of our residents. So my background's in earth sciences, and I worked in technical and management positions in the oil industry until I retired in 2014. And the reason I get a huge amount of pleasure for this this committee is that I spent 2 years living in social housing when I was a student in Manchester in the 1970s. And the particular development I lived in was so challenged that it actually warranted a slot on Panorama, where it was described as some of the worst social housing in Europe. Having experienced that firsthand, I'm looking forward to working with all of you to ensure that Waverley's already good housing service continues to innovate and improve, so that any appearance we have in the press is because we've delivered excellence and not got things wrong. Right, hopefully that was about a minute, just a minus 10 seconds. Shall we work around this way, Peter?
Yes, I'm Peter Marriott. I'm representing the Upper Hale ward in Farnham. Upper Hale has 3 distinct characteristics. It has a council estate, it has a fairly modern, sort of middle-class type estate, let's say, and it also has the old village. So there are 3 distinct areas which I'm representing. My background, a bit like Richard actually, in Manchester, a little bit before my British time, I think, because the old Trafford area I remember was knocked down, but left all the pubs because of some planning regulation. My background is in aerospace. I think John Ward at the introduction at the Mermaker meeting called both Penny and myself astrophysicist. I have a background in space-related technology or solution providers for designing and performance of space vehicles. So working for the European Space Agency, for example, dealing with the entry of these vehicles into foreign atmospheres. So this meeting is very much like the meetings I used to attend at ESA, where we would sit around a table talking about something you didn't know very much about.
It's not fair to everybody.
It strikes a chord.
That's just for me, though. So. Anyway, that's me in a nutshell.
Terry.
Yes, I'm Terry Daubney. I am now the chair of the tenants panel, and so since January. Been on the tenants panel for 4 years, and I've been a tenant in Waverley since 1980. So I've experienced quite a lot within Waverley. I've seen the good, the bad, and I've seen the rise from the bad to good. I currently feel that as a tenant we are getting a fairly good service, but we could be better. I worked within the house service for 40 years as an ambulance, moving up the ranks, and retired 10 years ago. And now I've taken on this, and I do a bit of part-time coach driving.
Excellent, thank you.
Dennis Smith. I've been a tenant for over 25 years plus. I don't think my background is really relevant, but so to say, I did a bit of plumbing, so mind a little bit of that once upon a time. And other than that, I have plenty of time for you to share.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, I'm Patricia Ellis. I've lived in Cranley for 45 years. I've been a councillor representing Cranley West for quite a few terms of office now. I have 4 daughters who've all now moved away from Cranley, but I love the area. My background, I'm an engineer by profession. Firstly working with IBM firstly in hardware and then moving to software. And although I've retired quite a few years ago, I have to say, I've always, during my work at Waverley, been associated in some respects with the Housing Committee. I very much enjoyed working with the Tenants Panel. I've seen many changes in our addressing the situations of homelessness in Waverley, but I'm happy to be on a housing department again. Well, committee, should I say. Thank you.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Jack Lee. I'm a councillor from Milford, and I've lived in Milford and Whitley for the last 30 years. And I've just recently joined the council Having said that, my very first assignment was to meet somebody with a housing problem. So I'm beginning to get to know the ins and outs. My background is in the information industry, and funny enough, I've worked in both aerospace and in the other area that you were talking about, which I've forgotten about already. Anyway, I used to do documentation for aircraft and oil rigs, I remember that. My projects were fairly large scale and across several countries at a time.
Right, I'm Anna James and I represent Chiddingfold now, but I was Whitley and Hambledon for the previous 4 years, and prior to that I did 14 years at East Hampshire District Council, where we had no council houses because we'd sold them all to the Housing Association. So I did a year on the housing panel here, committee, so I could learn a bit about how council houses work. I didn't go to Manchester University. I have 2 O-levels and 1 is art, but my daughter went to Manchester, and I'm really glad we've got an ambulance person here. I feel really good about that. And my background is with 2 O-levels. I'm a couturier, and for those who don't know it, they make clothes. And I have no academic qualifications whatsoever, which is why I'm quite good on ONS, because I have to ask questions, because a lot of it is absolute double Dutch. So you do have to ask questions, and I don't mind asking the difficult ones. And somebody said to me, Anna, you ask all the questions that all these gentlemen would like to ask, but don't feel they dare. So if you need anything asked, ask me and I will ask it.
That must deserve a clap. Well, I'm sorry to say I'm an ex-alumna of Manchester University. And basically I studied foreign languages. And actually, thinking about the past, I got the tap on the shoulder from Foreign Office MI6 some years ago. And I said to them, no, I want to pursue the affordable housing that we need in our borough, because in the past I knew Andrew Smith. I chaired the Whitley Parish Council Affordable Housing Working Party for 10 years. I was on the Whitley Parish Council, I think, for 17 years. I've lived in Whitley and Hambledon ward since 1974, and I was on Waverley for 8 years, from 1995 to 2003. I think the mathematicians will tell you I've got that is 8 years. My interest then really was planning, but I've always been concerned about housing provision in Waverley, which is why I was so keen on affordable housing. Can't think of anything else at the moment, except I am terribly happy to be on this particular scrutiny committee.
Hello everyone, my name's Michaela Gray. For those of you who don't know, I've worked for Waverley for 30 years, almost 30 years, and 17 of those years were in housing. I also ran a project for 10 years called Don't Lose Your Home and Business, where I helped all the residents from Waverley, with their housing issues or their business rates or any other issue. I was like the go-to girl. Then when I left Waverley, I thought I still love Waverley, so I want to come back and I'll try to be a councillor. Well, here I am, and I hope that I work very hard for Waverley and continue to do so.
And I think that deserves it.
I'm Richard Cole, I represent Cranley East. Background, I work in university physics research and actually some of the similar contacts that Peter was mentioning. I was previously borough councillor up in the Midlands for 8 years in an authority which had a very similar mix to here, having quite a large stock of council properties that they still have, in fact, which of course they ran. So I was on the housing committee there, I think, for all 8 years. So I've got some background in what council property management means. So I hope I can contribute something here on that basis.
Excellent. Great. Quite a talent pool. Excellent. That's very good. Okay, so we've heard from members. Now the the officers, leaders of service for the two housing service areas are going to give us an introduction to what they do and what we're going to be worrying about for the hopefully for quite a long time.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, councillors. It's a double act, and I'm going first. Hugh Wagstaff, my colleague, will take over the presentation about halfway in. I think we would all agree that housing impacts on every area of life, and we all need a sustainable, affordable home that's secure. We have a housing service, one service, with two distinct teams but with shared aims. There's me looking very serious. There's Mr Wagstaff, minus tie, looking very frivolous. Quite the other way around, actually. I think one thing that we wanted to say right at the beginning, that the customer service standards, the way that we deal with our tenants, heads up absolutely every aspect of the service, whether it's homelessness prevention or building new homes, property maintenance, and there are just some of the aims and objectives that we all have in housing when we're dealing with our customers. We are here for them, and I won't read all of this because A, it'll take too much time, and I'm sure that we can send the presentation round to you as members of the committee afterwards for you to look at. I'm the head of housing delivery and communities, so my responsibility kind of spans both homelessness prevention and housing, new build housing, housing delivery, but also the communities aspect of the work, dealing with antisocial behaviour, community safety, the grants that we give to voluntary organisations, our day centres, the CAB, the Hopper bus service, things like that. I've just taken on that role, part of the role, from March. Strategic housing and delivery comes into a number of areas. At the top of that is developing our housing strategies, and one of the first things that you as a committee will do at the next meeting is to look at and scrutinise the annual progress review for our housing strategy. If you haven't had a chance yet to look at it, do go online and see what we are aiming to do over the next 5 years in all aspects of housing, providing housing for those in need in the borough. Various things will come out of the strategy. You can see those things on the screen in terms of helping people to find the right home, looking after the council housing register, improving conditions in those who live in private rented accommodation, building new homes, something I think you'll hear a lot about in this committee, and working with partners to deliver affordable homes with housing associations. So the team is, as you see on the screen, we have teams building houses, working with housing association partners and preparing and delivering our housing strategy, looking after the private rented sector, the team that does that, service improvement, housing needs and so on. You will meet a number of these people, these key officers, who will come to the committee to present the particular work that they do, to be scrutinised and to be able to enter into the work that we do on the committee, particularly Annalisa Howson, who's here tonight, our service improvement manager, is a regular at this committee, and those of you who have been on the committee before will know her, and Louisa Blundell, who heads up the housing development team. As I say, in the past there's been a great deal of interest in the new build, and Louisa, and both Annalisa and Louisa have been involved in the working groups that this committee has done since it began. I'm not going to read this either, but it's very important that we know what affordable housing is. It's one of those terms like sustainability. It will mean whatever you want it to mean. Essentially, affordable housing is delivered for those who can't afford to buy or rent on the open market. It always requires a subsidy, either by means of grant or low land price, to keep any rents or sales, if it's a shared ownership home, available to those who are on low to medium incomes. And you'll not be surprised to know that in Waverley that is a problem, and there are issues that face us when we're delivering and providing affordable housing. There is a lack of supply, there's a lack of market housing supply, but there's certainly a lack of affordable housing supply. and often the planning system has an impact on the delivery of affordable homes, particularly on when we're delivering those through Section 106 sites with developers, whole viability question, and how so often the affordable housing numbers are squeezed by developers through the planning process. There is a lack of clarity in the policy coming out of the government. We really don't know what's going to happen in the future. We have seen a bit of a change recently in more awareness of the needs for social housing tenants, the need for grant for social rent, welfare reform, what will universal credit really mean, possible increase in homelessness, but we also have this great opportunity for partnership working with a number of housing associations and housing providers. Again, here's a table, you can look at it afterwards, but the big figure is ringed for you, the average house price in Waverley Borough. This is a couple of years old now, we're waiting to update the figures. I don't think it's changed much from £500,000. Now that doesn't mean to say all houses, or that's not a minimum price, it's an average price. And so for people trying to afford to buy a home in our borough, particularly younger people starting out on the housing ladder, it is simply impossible unless they have an enormous amount of help from the bank of mum and dad or earning very high salaries. So we have to identify and respond to housing need. And if you don't feel like wading through the housing strategy, there is at the back of it an affordability and housing need annex that really sets out for us the needs of our borough and the challenges that face us in terms of what people can afford and the level of need. And so particularly Alice Lean and Esther Lyons in Housing Strategy are constantly looking at making us aware of need and how that need can be met through our housing strategies. We have one of the best homelessness records in the south of England, and by far the best in Waverley, because we got hold of prevention long before the government did. It's far better to prevent a family becoming homeless than it is to try and do something with them when they turn up at the council with their suitcases. And so the work is very much around preventing people becoming homeless when they are going to be evicted, or when they have that real need, they're going to lose their home. Our officers work with them to find a solution for that and to ensure that they're not actually made homeless, which is a devastating thing. And it's devastating to have to go into bed and breakfast accommodation, and we may have 1 or 2 households over the year that have to spend limited amounts of time in B&B. We have a number of mechanisms. We work with partners, other housing associations, specialist housing associations, to ensure that people will always have a roof over their head. And you'll hear more about that as the committee works through. Developing new council homes, Church View, just in Godalming. I hit that a little bit early, but here you can see a number of developments that we have managed to deliver in the last few years in Farnham, in Wonersh, in Hazelmere, Shamley Green, and in Farncombe. And one of the big projects we're involved in, Oxford Ridge in Godalming, regenerating a 1930s estate. At the top there you'll see site, it's just known as Site D. It does have a name now which I have forgotten, something like Oxford Heights. Can you remember, Hugh? No, you can't remember either. But it's the first of the major developments on a site where we are redeveloping 6 sites, where we are demolishing existing homes, building new ones. For example, on that site there were 8 existing homes, there are now 16. And we work closely with the community, with local councillors over the last few years to get that project up and running, as well as new build. There are refurbishments, taking properties that really are not fit for purpose, moving the tenant out for a while, gutting the property, providing what is in effect a new home, and moving the tenant back in. I've said that in 2 sentences, but the most difficult thing about this project is decanting, moving those who have agreed to see their home either knocked down or completely refurbished into something temporary and then bringing them back. It's a lovely end result, but it's quite a journey we have to take through some of our tenants on, particularly if they're older or vulnerable, to get them to that really fine new home at the end of the process. Way Court, just up the road here, that won an award recently as well for its design. To improve housing conditions in the private rented sector, I hinted at that. We have a small but growing private rented sector market in the borough. It's a very important tenure for us, and those landlords need regulating. There are statutory regulations that have to be applied by us as a council, and also houses in multiple occupation have to be licensed, and also the team manages disabled facilities grants, so that people who do need adaptations, maybe extensions, wet rooms, downstairs bedrooms to their homes, there's a significant pot of money provided through the government for us to administer for people to remain in their own homes and have the equipment and facilities that they need. Again, Simon Brisk, our private sector housing manager, will be with us on committee to share his work, and so that you can have a good look at that. Then finally, I've hinted at it, working with developers and housing associations. Most of our affordable homes come through this route, through the planning process, through Section 106 agreements where developers have to provide a percentage of affordable homes in order to get their planning consent. These are the most recent homes in Ewhurst, Cherry Tree Lane, delivered by Mount Green Housing Association, and last week the portfolio holder, Councillor Rosamond, and the Mayor went and had a look at these new properties. For those of you who haven't, or who have already seen some of the new homes that we build and our housing association partners build, be well worth a visit to look at the quality of homes that are now being built for our residents who need a rented home, a shared ownership home that is affordable and sustainable and of the highest quality. So I'll pause there and hand over to Hugh, and then I'm sure there'll be questions afterwards. I can take some questions now, if that's all right, Chairman. Yes?
Yes. On affordable housing, obviously there's a planning function to make sure they get built.
Yes.
What's the role of the housing department in terms of, in general, affordable housing? I mean, what do you do once that, is something you do once the house is built, or do you advise the planning department on?
Yes. I think one thing that our housing strategy and enabling team do is that any planning application that comes in with an affordable housing obligation, they are a consultee, so we will make recommendations on, or we will try to ensure that the right percentage of affordable homes is adhered to. We advise on tenure, size, mix. Often a developer will come in and speak to us or a housing association before the planning application is submitted, and we encourage that, because if we can sort of bottom out the affordable housing early before the planning application is submitted, that it's policy compliant, that it delivers a number of rented and shared ownership homes, 1 bed, 2 bed, 3 bed that we require, then we have it's called enabling, and it can be very effective. And it's a vital part, sort of bridges planning and housing, really. So our enabling officers will sit in the planning department for a day or so a week, very close relationships, particularly with the planning policy team. One of the last things that the committee looked at was the affordable housing planning obligations supplementary planning document on affordable housing. This came through to the committee, where we set out what we expect developers to provide and details of how that should be provided, mix, tenure, and also what happens if, for whatever reason, that affordable housing can't be delivered on site, and we collect instead a commuted sum which goes into a war chest, which enables us to fund affordable housing in the borough. So there's a lot we can do to govern and ensure that the right affordable homes are delivered through the planning process. It doesn't always work. Sometimes the developers will claim the V word, viability, to say they can only do 14% or 15% or none. That then has to be scrutinised by an independent expert to say whether that is true or not. And developers have got very good at, and the government in recent times has allowed them to, often wriggle out of affordable housing. The tide is changing on that, and I think the government realised that we are not going to get all the affordable housing we need through the planning process, so therefore there has to be more teeth for councils to challenge developers to make sure they do deliver what the policy says they should.
Yes. My experience of affordable housing was in the days when the government provided grants through the Ministry of Housing, as it was then, to housing associations. Does that happen at all nowadays, or are we totally reliant on getting enabling development, which means market housing subsidising affordable?
Yes, it does happen, Councillor. We went through a period where the huge emphasis was on providing grant funding for forms of low-cost home ownership. When Theresa May became Prime Minister, she thought that through again and realised actually government money must be used to subsidise rented housing, provide capital grant for rented housing. So we've seen the tide turn again back towards how it was not at the levels, but there is now funding for social rent where there hadn't been for a number of years. So on our developments we've secured Homes England as it is now. It used to be the Homes and Communities Agency before that, Housing Corporation before that, the one you mentioned, which I think was before my time. And so there is capital grant funding. There are lots of hoops to jump through, but we've secured funding for one or two of our schemes. There's been a press release today from the National Housing Federation, who are the kind of governing, well not governing, but the umbrella body for housing associations, Shelter, and the CPRE actually, interestingly, urging the government to invest a considerable sum of money in delivering the rented and the social homes that we need over the next 10 years. So I think there's been the ship has moved again to see that actually, because you can fund a person by increasing their benefits so that they can pay higher and higher rents, or you could capital grant fund bricks and mortar, which gives a resource to the community in perpetuity, and therefore that capital grant will keep the rents low over the lifetime of that property until the loan is repaid. So it's far better to invest in bricks and mortar, and I think again that thinking has come to the fore.
Thank you.
I hope. We're seeing it more now.
Good evening. My name is Hugh Bagstaff, and I've got the responsibility to manage the council's homes. It's a great responsibility and a great job, and over the last 6 years since I've been working for Waverley, I've had a great relationship with this committee who have supported us develop our services, so it's great to have this new committee, and we're really looking forward to having a great relationship, a productive relationship with you all. We've got 5,000 homes, 400 leaseholders, and as Andrew said, our emphasis initially is the people within our homes. That's what we are, a people service, we are a customer service, and that's what we focus on. But to achieve that great customer service, we've got to maintain our homes well, and that is around two things, is again managing contractors who deliver that service, but also long-term planning to ensure that we have the required finance going forward to maintain our homes. We have a range of teams, and during the presentation we're going to come to most of these teams. The ones I want to point out on this page is Paul Taylor. He's our asset manager, strategic asset manager. And that's a new role that's came in the last year in terms of looking long term how we're going to maintain our homes, our stock, and to identify the money that we need to deliver quality homes going forward. He has a team of surveyors who are going out, doing stock condition surveys, getting the data, and then we have a database where all that data goes in, and Paul is able to analyse and predict what expenditure we need going forward. The other new post that we've put in place is Lindsay Kennedy, the finance. And again, we felt that we need that strategic look at our finance going forward as well. And Lindsay has brought that to us. And the other thing that she's also doing is also working with our teams to have more we have a bit of nous around budgets and to actually own budgets. And again, we feel if people have that delegated authority around their budgets, they can make better decisions, and that delivers better customer service. Lastly, there's David Brown there. In terms of senior living, we've got 8 senior living schemes. They used to be called sheltered schemes. Because of the removal of supporting people grant, we reviewed the service, and but still have a manager or an officer at each scheme still managing the accommodation. I think for you to do your job going forward, you need to have some awareness of the housing finance. Housing is ring-fenced, so the rents are there to support the management of the housing stock or to build new homes. The general fund activities like bin collection or something can't be subsidised by the housing revenue account. So the housing revenue account has got its own ring-fenced account. And in terms of, we have a business plan, and we have a business plan because we had to take a mortgage out of £189 million, which is around now 8 years that we've had that loan, and that was to pay off the central government, so we did not have to pay negative subsidies back to them. At one time we were paying half our rents back to the central government in these negative subsidies, which is why the council couldn't maintain its homes and tried to transfer the stock twice to a housing association. The residents voted against that, and that's why we're in this position today. It changed that the government introduced self-financing, so we paid them off, I'm not sure what we're paying off, the £189 million, and so we were able to keep all our rents. To pay for the £189 million, we got a loan, and at the time, because the interest rates were so low, it's actually financially been beneficial to us, which has helped us have surpluses on our accounts, which has enabled the council to build new homes. So even though Andrew mentioned there is some kind of grant from the government, that is relatively minimal. The new homes that you're seeing is mostly, majority, from people's own rents. It's not from the council tax, it's from people's paying their rents that we do. So and that's one of the drivers that we want to build new homes. But to do that, we need to, one of our objectives in front of us here is to maximise our net income, to provide good quality homes and maintain the value of the council's assets, and then to drive down our operating costs and identify efficiencies. And through that, we can help supply those new homes. So we're having a session in September, an informal session rather than a public meeting, to talk more about finance. But I'm just putting these figures up to just give you a feel of the kind of monies that we're talking about. So in terms of the contribution, in terms of this year's budget, we've got £4 million going to new build. We've got £3.6 million for capital works, and responsive repairs, £5.5 million. And then you're going to see a line below there, the loan management, that's interest and paying the capital, some of the capital off, is £9.9 million. So there's some big figures there and some services underneath some of those figures that you might want to grab hold of. And as I say, I think I've got some illustrations later on, but through your work and through work previously of the committee, you and we have delivered efficiencies to enable new homes to be built. So this is the example. So in the past, this committee has really focused on voids, our performance of voids, how quickly we can re-let. Sorry, going into jargon, I'm really tempted not to go into jargon. A void is an empty home. So when someone leaves a home and then the period before we can re-let it is called the void period. And of course, the quicker that we can let it, the least we lose on our rent. Okay. When I came in here, we were taking 40, 50 odd days to re-let properties, and this committee has really got us focusing on improving that, and we had Project 20, which was around reletting properties. That's key to key within the 20 days. And when I started 6 years ago, we were losing around 3% of our income because of voids. We've got it down to 1% through the 20 days. So what this graph is showing is, the point is just a small decrease in performance can actually have a big impact. So therefore, if our void performance decreased and we actually were 1.25 income loss of the rent roll, would be 80k per annum and nearly £500,000 by 2025. If our performance actually dropped 1 percentage point, another percentage point to 2, means we'd be losing 300k per annum, which would be nearly £2 million by 2025. So what I'm saying here, the kind of work this committee has done before has improved customer service, because we haven't got empty properties around the borough. We're able to get people moved in so that the homeless can move into homes, but we're also saving substantial amounts of money, which has enabled us to build new homes. And that is the great piece of work that this committee has done. And there's other examples similar to this, but it's just, I think, to show you from small pieces of improvement in performance, we can actually get great efficiencies. So you've seen some big figures there in terms of maintaining our properties. And to do that, we go through contracts and contractors. And again, this committee in the past 2 years, and it's one of the subgroups that Richard worked on, was about reviewing where we should go with our contracts, how we should procure our contracts, and then overlooked how we implemented those decisions in terms of procuring. So we procured most of our contracts last year, and all the contracts went live in April of this year. We had a mobilisation programme, and we're currently in stabilisation. And one of the areas that this committee may want to continue is to overlook is the new contracts. And again, we've had some great experience of contract management within my team, and it's about developing that going forward. There's other smaller procurements going forward, which we can bring a list to, which you may wish to overlook and consider. But there is, as I say, there's an awful lot of money that we're spending on contracts, and our team have got to be efficient contract managers. And the other side of it is actually making sure that we efficiently spend the money. So there's sometimes we've overspent, and sometimes you can underspend, especially in the capital budgets. That's not good, because they're there to improve our homes. So contract management is a big thing for our teams. And of course, contract management in the new build, because again, even though we say we're building our homes, they are built through contractors. So again, we need to be effective contract managers and project managers going forward. Rent collection. So we've got a rent roll now of just over £28 million. One of the things in the last 4 or 5 years is we've had to reduce our rents by 1%, which was statutory. In terms of our business plan, we had actually, initially in our business plan, had inflation plus 1%, which was part of the settlement that the government gave, and then they went back on that and actually reduced our rent. So there was a double whammy in terms of that rent reduction. But in any case, so we've got a rent roll of around £28 million. We have a fantastic experienced team. The arrears at the end of the last financial year was around £180,000, which is about 0.6 of the rent roll. We only did 2 rent evictions in that year, and one of them was a chap bizarrely got stuck abroad, but when he came back, he paid that off. So there was only one case where we had, a family had failed in terms of not paying their rent and not sustaining their tenancy. So it's a fantastic team. Going forward, the issue is universal credit, but it's really hard to actually monitor that. The new applicants or new claimants are going on to universal credit, but the full migration, i.e. everyone who's on benefits going over to universal credit, we don't know the date. So it's something that we just need to monitor going forward and see. The arrears for tenants that are, the average arrears for tenants that are on universal credit who are in arrears are slightly higher than our tenants that are on no benefit or on housing benefit. But many of them have had arrears in the past. So it's really hard to see what the trend is, but if there is an issue that we may need to really focus on the tenants that have universal credit. But I think the issue is then maybe that they're coming in and out of work, and I think that's the issue is them coping with that financial change. So great performance, but it's definitely such a critical thing that we need to keep an eye on how that performance is going. So managing and maintaining our homes. So just a quick thing, the new contractor, NPS, is in the building with us. So they sit with us in the middle of the housing. But we, as the council, take the calls, raise the orders, and then pass that over to the contractor. Again, this is where the emphasis of customer services and how we manage that contract. The day-to-day response repairs is so important to our tenants. That's really how they judge us. If they're paying their rent by direct debit, the only real contact they're going to have with us is through repairs. And that's why that service has got to be so good, because it's so important to our tenants. And so this team of people raise the orders, get them accurate, etc., pass them over to the contractor. The aim, what we need to do, and it's our aim, is the first time fix. If we can fix that repair through that one call and through the operative only going once and the job's done, the satisfaction rates are in the 95%. As soon as there's 2 visits, 3 visits, the satisfaction of the residents plummets to the low 80s. So that first time fix is critical, and there's so many things to achieve that needs to be achieved, especially around the contractor and making sure they have parts and goods and the job ticket's accurate, etc., etc. So that's something that, again, this committee has really worked in terms of the previous contractor, did an awful lot of work, even calling in the contractor and hauling them over the coals, would you say, Chair, in terms of, this performance has got to be improved. There was this odd thing that they weren't sending in their invoices on time. It was so. But this committee really grabbed hold of that a couple of years ago, and the performance increased. And through that performance increasing, actually, there was a reduction in the amount of money we were spending on repairs. So it's this thing. If we improve our customer performance, we can actually get efficiencies. Again, it's not to look in this detail, and when we have our day. But it's just to show the kind of thing that we're doing. This is the customer journey. You can't, but it's each stage of the journey. And we have an independent a company ring up people to what they felt each part of the journey. And what we did in terms of improving performance is actually focus on where there was low levels of satisfaction. And this is really, again, the graph's not too clear, but this shows you that we're over the bench. We were most of the time over the benchmark compared to other providers that use the service. But again, benchmarking is maybe something that the committee would like to see. Now, the centre of the service. So maintenance is the most important tenant, but the centre of the service is our tenancy agreement with our tenants. That's the critical thing. Again, in the last couple of years, the committee had been involved in reviewing the tenancy agreement, and we feel we probably need to review it on a more regular basis than we have done in the past. And this group of people who are now really a stable team, very experienced, very dedicated, help manage the tenancies, manage that relationship that we have with our residents. They are the linchpin, so they will deal with any breakdown or possible breakdown in tenancies, any complaints around noise nuisance, antisocial behaviour, that kind of thing. And within that work, they then work within partnership, and then that's when they work with a lot of some people in Andrew's team in terms of community safety work, etc. So this is a really multi-talented team, and I think the council should be proud of such a team. But it does; they really represent again the whole of the housing service, and a sort of dedication to it. So again, the team are out about working with Andrew's team, with the property services team, in terms of improving and enhancing the neighbourhoods. The other part of that continuing success has been working with people, with Terry, with Dennis, and with Pat at the back. It is so critical that tenants are involved in the service. They haven't got the ability to move from landlord to landlord. Over the many years, the government's attempted to come up with things, of having options around that. But they have really been helping giving feedback, actually capturing feedback outside of wider tenants, holding events, holding meetings, and they have really helped us shape the service where we need to go, put us on the straight and steady on going forward. And it was so important that Richard, welcomed Dennis and Terry tonight, because they are critical. And of course, the point I do make is it is their money that we're spending, their money that's paying our salaries, it's their money building new homes. And some things that some people forget, that council tenants also pay council tax. So they're paying that as well. So they're paying two lots of money to the council. Scrutiny Group is another group, and they brought reports to this for their work here. And again, this is great that they can come to this meeting, have their findings. And again, this meeting has overlooked the action plan that's come from that scrutiny. So we've got a housing service plan. It's really high level, and its objectives have really matched what I've been discussing now. We've got to be financially robust. We've got to meet tenants' needs. And I haven't really spoken too much about tenants' needs and the range of people's needs. But there are people in the community, not just in council housing, but with mental health and physical disabilities, where we've been meeting our needs. So, for example, people with disabilities, Andrew mentioned the grant for aids and adaptations in the private sector. In housing, in social housing, we've got to fund that out of the rents as well. We have a substantial budget on that. I think it was around £200,000 that we spent on aids and adaptations to council tenants' homes last year. And again, the impact that does have on some people's lives is just amazing. And so it's from the small, really small help aids to the larger things. And in the past, we've done extensions, pods, and stuff like that. With social services and other services sort of moving away, we're having to step in to do a lot more support of our residents. And again, that's something that we need to monitor, and making sure we've got enough resources to ensure tenancies are sustained. We need to be an effective partner in terms of, I've mentioned with our contractors, we've got a huge amount of contractors, effective partners in terms of community safety, in terms of social services. We've also got to ensure there's a great customer experience, and we've talked a lot about that. And the other thing within our service plan is about making our people professional. We've really pushed that people get qualifications, do appropriate learning and development. And I really think that's paid dividends. So we've now got our health and safety team, our compliance team. I haven't mentioned too much about health and safety tonight. Our compliance team, now they're all fully qualified in health and safety qualification, which I think is fantastic going forward. And it really shows the way that we've had to build teams, because recruitment is quite a difficult thing in the technical areas, is developing our own people. And we've done an awful lot in terms of developing our own people on Andrew's side and my side. So that's the service plan, and over the year what's a 3-year plan, will be scrutinised on that. We've really said most of the stuff in terms of going forward for us. So the strategies, the one big strategy that's be coming in the next year or so is the asset management strategy. Where we're going to go with our stock, where do we need to invest, what standard of our home, what standard do we expect of our homes, and that's also about communal areas and how access to the of schemes as well. So I've been doing some work going around the senior living schemes. Despite our huge investment in those schemes, there's still issues around access to the schemes in terms of large steps going in and out of doorways. We've got budget setting coming up, so the budgets will be coming in the autumn here. There's general performance, because I've mentioned how important it is around performance. There's policies, we don't know where the government's going with legislation, best practice, and responding to tenants' aspirations. There's a slide around where you can get further information. But again, if you wish to come and talk to us, come out on visits with us, we're more than welcome to do that. I'm passing over to Yasmin.
Thank you, Hugh. So I'm the scrutiny officer that supports the Housing O&S committee, this committee, and at the request of the chairman, we thought it was important to highlight some of the highlights from the previous committee, and some of the value that it's added for the housing service. So I think Hugh's touched on pretty much all of these, or Andrew, as they've gone through. But number one, the improvement in performance, particularly the void relet time. So you've just got some examples there, as Hugh was saying, 57 working days to turn around the void, which is the empty home, down to 15 in quarter one of 18-19. I think in the reports today it's on 20, that target of 20. So as Hugh said, that's been largely down to a lot of the work that this committee's done. The maintenance contracts renewal has also been touched upon, so a significant amount of work was done by the housing improvement subcommittee from the corporate O&S, which sort of existed before the process we've got at the moment. And as Hugh said, those contracts have just come into effect this April. So that's a lot of work that this committee, a lot of value this committee had. Waverley Scrutiny Group, Hugh's already mentioned, they're another group from the tenants panel. So they're a group of tenants that work very hard on producing reports that make their way to this committee. So they've done reports on voids, mutual exchanges, recharges, all that have resulted in some really useful recommendations for the service that this committee is then to oversee and see how those impact the service that the customer ultimately receives. The attitudes to social housing study was something I was particularly heavily involved in. Council Housing Pride or Prejudice was a piece of work that had, I think, about 18 recommendations come out of that, and basically to try and do as much as we can as a council to tackle any prejudice that council tenants face and promote pride in our council homes and tenant pride in their homes. So that was a very interesting piece of work that we undertook. And finally, the housing design standards was also sort of a policy development project from this committee that developed the standards that currently all our council homes are being built to. So it's a really effective piece of work, really important to the whole of the council, not just the housing service, in developing that policy and those standards. So those are just a few of the highlights that this committee added value to previously. It sort of gives you a feel for the sort of the breadth and the depth of work that they've been involved in, the previous committee was involved in. I'm happy to take any questions, I'm sure Hugh is as well, Chairman.
Any questions?
Just a quick one, and I think I read somewhere in one of the reports, I couldn't find it here one today, that the housing associations provide, is it 25% of the affordable homes? Is that the number? And does that imply you do 75%? Is the next bit?
Well, in terms of new build delivery, no, I'm not sure, Peter, where that came from. Certainly in terms of housing association delivery, then it would be more like the other way around. In terms, if you're looking at the pipeline and the delivery of
affordable homes in Waverley. We can certainly provide you with the last few years' statistics and breakdown of how many housing association homes and how many of our own new build homes.
Okay, thanks.
May I ask, please, about something that is rather detailed about turning around the voids, reletting. I'm just wondering how many offers of housing a potential tenant actually has. I'm recalling in days gone by that somebody of my acquaintance was only given the offer of 2 flats, I think they were, in really quite different parts of the borough. Do we find that there are difficulties with the potential or the actual tenants feeling aggrieved at the limitation on the offers that they get?
Andrew can talk more about this, but if you want to go in more detail, but we run a scheme called choice-based lettings. So people bid, so we don't actually do direct allocations. There's choice-based lettings that people bid for the property that they want. So they go online and can see the properties that we've got available, and they will bid for the properties that they wish. So in theory, that in terms of our limited stock, that they are getting what they're requesting. By being clear.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's a change from what I was familiar with.
Yeah.
Obviously, I need to know when things are different now. So, thank you.
So if someone's got less priority, they've got to really go for a property that's not so desirable to get a choice to be rehoused. So that might be or wait. So that might be some of the frustration. But as I say, they do have a choice.
Right, and we can look up the allocations policy, can we?
Chair, if I may, I think that's an interesting one, Christine, because one of the things that I would like this committee to scrutinise and to look at with us is the review of our allocations policy that we're going to be doing later this year. So that will come to the committee. It's a legal requirement to have a scheme of allocations, so we have to do that. And we have revised it. Various things come in from the government. I can give you 1 or 2 examples, but armed services, those who met with the armed services, we had to amend the policy for that. We've had to amend the policy for various other things. So now it's really time to step back and have a good look at how we allocate our affordable homes, to whom should we allocate and how we construct and run the housing register. So that will be an essential piece of work that personally I would like this committee to help with and to scrutinise in this particular cycle. And I think the Chair and I have discussed that as a possibility, and that will come through later in the work programme.
Okay, thank you.
On the voids, because I remember when I was on it before, I mean they have come down, the voids were really quite big, and I remember asking about that. How long before a property becomes empty are they advertised? I mean, if you're buying your own house, I mean, when I bought my house, the previous owners moved out by midday and I moved in at 3 o'clock.
Yes, there's a couple of issues. So we look to advertise, so people who move in their property need to give notice, and what we do is try to utilise that notice period.
Right.
So we aim to advertise the properties before they actually become void, if we've got the information. There's 2 problems. Firstly, many of our homes become void because of death, so there isn't that much notice, or people go to homes. So that does slow down looking at our average. So where we get notice, if we utilise that time, we can turn around the property a lot quicker. But if it's a sudden death, and we allow people 2 weeks relatives to clear the property. So that causes delays. So in terms of getting the average, where we've got the notice, we've really got to utilise that time to bring, so we can let them within 5 days or 10 days, which makes up for the stuff that may take us 30 days to let. But we're constantly reviewing our process to ensure we're utilising that time when people do give us notice.
Okay, so we are thinking in terms of having an informal work session sometime in September, which will enable you to actually explore the huge amount of information that we've been given in much more detail and a slightly more relaxed environment. So we're going to get that date settled fairly soon, and that will provide the opportunity to continue the journey up the learning curve, so that we will become very useful as a committee very quickly.
Can I ask a question on the voice again? If the people doing the maintenance or the refurbishment, or whatever you like to call it, is there anyone from the council who goes in to supervise or oversee their work, or is it left entirely up to them?
No, so we do the specification of works, we identify what works are required, and then we would post-inspect. So in terms of overlooking, we're doing some work with the contractor where we overlook the repairs while they're being done, but in terms of the voids, we're currently just post-inspecting when the works are completed. So we're not supervising necessarily while the work's being done, no. We leave that to the contractor.
Yeah, I didn't mean so much looking over their shoulders, for instance, but sending someone in more than once, say. But if you've got to, I'm guessing that they had to come under pressure to actually alter these numbers.
Yes.
So, I mean, if that's the only way that seems to better the numbers, if you like, what's wrong with sending in an independent or someone independent of the maintenance firm?
Yes. So that's what we do have surveyors and inspectors that do that work. Right. I mean, just to be clear, I mean, it was around improving the performance of the contractor, but that was only one small part. As we've identified, the actual allocation of a property needs to be efficient as well, and in terms of communication with the new tenant going in, that needed to improve. So it was the whole process that we had to look at. Of course, a critical part is the maintenance work, and that has improved and can improve. But the other thing is we don't just have one contractor go in, we could have 2 or 3, 4 contractors going in, especially if asbestos has to be removed, especially if a gas boiler needs to be upgraded, and then if a kitchen and bathroom needs to be replaced, etc. So it isn't just going in and doing a quick sweep, it is around sometimes quite complex work. But I do take your point, and that's why I said it's so important for us we've got so many contractors that we are effective contract managers.
Can I just ask, do we keep statistics on homelessness in the borough and the amount of people that are in temporary accommodation? Because there must be people that aren't yet in a home, but they're in, I think you mentioned bed and breakfast.
Yes, we do. And that's reported on each time, and the statistics show that the number of people in temporary accommodation is exceptionally low, certainly lowest in Surrey. One family or the household here, one household there, probably not more than 1 or 2 at any given time throughout the year, which is a remarkable achievement. So as I say, we are constantly preventing homelessness and working with those who are threatened with homelessness, finding solutions for them so that they can then move to another home that is suitable. Obviously there are those who are vulnerable, those who are what we would call in socially excluded groups, and we work particularly with partners like the York Road project in Woking, Transform Housing and Support, that provide accommodation for those with high level needs, and we work with them and we purchase what we call bed spaces, so that if somebody comes through with that kind of need, we can place them somewhere which is suitable, where they'll have the support, hopefully get back on their feet and be able to maintain what I would call a normal tenancy at some point. And I think, Councillor, as the committee work progresses, you'll see more about how we work with homelessness, and the strategy, and the review of that strategy will come to this committee, so you'll have a full raft of information that you can look at and scrutinise.
Councillor?
Thank you. You did briefly mention private rented accommodation. So we have quite a lot of people desperate for accommodation. Now, if I know Waverley helps people to find privately rented accommodation, does that then mean that they fall off or out of our housing register?
No. I mean, if we are placing a homeless household and we need to find them a home, we will find them a home normally in a private rented property, because you can't leapfrog them onto the register if they're in high need, and then those who have been abandoned and have been waiting for a long time, that is a system that is very unfair. Now, then those people, once they're placed in a private rent accommodation, they can apply to go on the housing register. So then they can then move eventually to long-term social housing. But they can't go from homelessness right into a council house, because that will disadvantage those on the register who have been there a while and who will qualify.
Thank you.
I'm sorry to come back again.
That's
but
fine.
I do have another question.
That's fine.
I know of a case where there was a vulnerable single mother with a child who was made homeless by her in-laws and was having difficulties with her husband. And social services at Surrey got involved, and she was found temporary accommodation in Farnborough. So, can you tell me something about why it was necessary for her to be moved to Farnborough?
I wouldn't know, Christine, without looking at the case. There could be all sorts of reasons around that. It may be that was the only place where there was accommodation that suited. I really don't know. There are a lot of factors, particularly when you're dealing with that kind of household. There's possible domestic abuse. You mentioned difficulties with her husband.
That was the case.
So in that case, she would need to be housed out of borough. In fact, Farnborough is quite close if you're going to a refuge or protected accommodation. So without looking at the details of the case, I'm not too sure. But there are a lot of factors to be taken into consideration with that kind of case. Working with social services, with the domestic abuse outreach service, to find her somewhere which is safe and secure.
So, do you mind if I follow up and ask, do we have a refuge in Waverley for domestic abuse victims?
Do you know, I'm not entirely sure whether there's one in Waverley. My community safety colleagues would know, and also the housing specialist housing options support. But actually, I don't know. We don't run one. But whether domestic outreach service will have refuges, of course, the point is that we might well not know where they are.
The closest refuge is Basingstoke.
Basingstoke.
Sorry?
The closest refuge is Basingstoke.
Ooh. Well.
But the point is, if they need a refuge, they need to be moved out of area.
Yes. Absolutely.
Indeed, but perhaps it should be a reciprocal process.
Yes, I'm not sure of those details really. I can find out. But
Sorry, this has just been a train of thought,
Yeah.
but now this is presumably the place to raise these questions.
Yes.
So we'll have to bank it for about 20 minutes till we get onto the work programme stuff. And maybe there's a theme there that we could use to capture your ideas. Think about it for 20 minutes. I'm going to close things down now because we're going to have lots of opportunity to quiz officers further in a slightly more informal environment in September. And they're very amenable to email questions, so anything that you think of during the drive home, just as fire in the question, I'm sure you'll get a very quick response. Right, so the next item we've got is something that, as long as we agree to it during the work programme, there's a question, we'll be seeing the corporate performance report. It comes out quarterly, so we'll be seeing it during 4 of our 5 meetings during the year. It's a fairly new format that was put together when a new chief executive took over. There's a lot in it that goes beyond housing. So really the focus today is to worry about the housing. But if you're new to the council, I commend this document as a great way to learn what's going on around us. And the other officers outside of this committee will sure be very happy to answer questions on things that don't relate to housing. But can I ask Nora to introduce us to the fourth quarter of last year's report, and then we'll have some questions when she's led us through it.
Thank you very much, Chair. I can see a few familiar faces, but for those who don't know me, my name is Nora Coping, and I'm the Policy and Performance Officer for the Council. So my job is to run around the building once a quarter, chase people for the information, which we then combine into this quite comprehensive report, our corporate performance report, which is then being used at the senior management meetings, and then comes to the overview and scrutiny committees and to the executive as well. I thought before we actually dive into the report, it would be good for us to take a quick step back and just have a look what is the information we actually put into this report and why is it important. So the diagram that you can see behind me describes our performance policy framework. So at the very top of everything we do, we have the guiding corporate strategy, which derives from our legal requirements, statutory obligations, different policies we receive from the government, also the needs we have identified within our communities over the years, and priorities of the current political administration that they would like to pursue. Underneath this kind of guiding, overarching document that kind of sets our direction, we have different, more specific, service-specific plans and strategies as well. We have housing strategy that has been already mentioned today by Andrew and Hugh, that guides exactly what is happening within those two service areas. So this is the kind of very high-level overview and a kind of direction-setting section of our policy performance framework. Underneath all of that, we have service plans. So service plans are the way in which we translate our corporate strategy, so those very high-level documents, into actually operational actions. So this is these are the documents that guide then the operation and kind of present the information to our officers, what is expected of them to do within the years, so what are the specific objectives we wanted to accomplish. And underneath the service plans, we have few ways of looking at the monitoring. So we have different business as usual operations. So as I said, over the years we would have identified the needs within the communities, and we will pursue year on year on delivering similar actions, but we sometimes also will embark on some additional projects that we need to deliver in order to deliver the change within the council. For example, the new maintenance contract is not going to happen every year, but it will happen from time to time. And also some of the actions will lend themselves to be transformed into performance indicators. So for some of the areas, like for example the number of voids, we actually could develop a specific performance indicator and set a target that would then allow us to drive the performance in the direction that we want it to go to. And on the right, left, which will be your side? I always have trouble with that when working the presentation. So on your left side, left, doesn't matter. The service level monitoring section is exactly the same. So we have again the operational performance indicators and business as usual operations and smaller projects as well. But this is the more granular monitoring that we do on the officer level. So it's not something that our senior management looks at. It's something that we trust. We kind of delegate to our staff and fits into individual staff targets through the annual performance agreement. So at the beginning of every new financial year, each of the member of the staff within the council will be tasked with a specific list of objectives that they are asked to carry throughout the year. But this is, as I said, this section is more on the operational level. You as a committee and our senior management are looking at the more strategic level, so the corporate monitoring. Going into the report structure itself, as you can see, it is an extremely comprehensive report, but you're not going to be asked to look and scrutinize all of the sections, only very specific areas, which is the housing operations and housing strategy and delivery, which are usually at the very end of the report. The report is usually introduced by narrative from our chief executive and few other kind of corporate monitoring measures as well that might be of interest to you. Make sure to forget anything else. Last year we had actually reviewed the way we look at our performance monitoring. So in the past we had different reports going, kind of prepared internally, different reports coming to the ONS and executive as well. And it has been creating a lot of work, and also everyone was seeing information from different angles. So the reason you see such a comprehensive report is because we want to have one broad overview of everything that's happening in the council. So we've created a report that is in some areas quite operational. So I suppose when it travels through the organisation and to the ONS as well, different I suppose steps on the way will have different functions. So our senior management, when they look at the report, they will be concentrating on the operational actions, and it will be for them to take them away and to the teams to actually pursue. For the overview and scrutiny is more of a role of having information that you need in order to set the strategic direction where we want to head going forward as well. So each of the sections will have little very standard subsections. So we're going to have key successes and lessons learned and areas of concern. This section was introduced last year and it has been very helpful, and I think it's quite nice that heads of service have opportunity at the end of every quarter to talk to their teams and have a little quiet moment of reflection in their office and just write a little narrative on exactly what have gone right and what are the areas that they believe we need a little bit more support from the organization as well. That section is followed then by the performance indicator section, and the way we look at our indicators is through RAG rating. So it's a traffic light system rating. So red for not as good performance as we would want, amber for slightly off target, and green we're quite happy with that performance. So you're going to see when we actually get to the indicator section, very nice little map of trends just by looking at the colors. So it's very easy for us to identify quickly the areas of concern, if there are any. The section that follows performance indicators is service plans. So as it has been mentioned by Hugh and Andrew, each of the service areas have their own actions that they will be pursuing in the year ahead. And the way we monitor the delivery of those actions on the corporate level is through the little dashboard that we prepare on a quarterly basis. So we look at kind of high-level overview on how many of the actions are being to be completed on track, how many of them have fallen off track, but they are in hand, and some of them might need escalation as well. And for those, because we want to have a corporate overview, sometimes we might feel that we're concentrating on the negatives rather than having the whole picture. I think that's the kind of role of a strategic view, that we just want to go and adjust those areas that are not performing as well. So for those that are not doing, the actions that are not doing as well as we would want to, we always list them below the little kind of graphic, just giving you an idea of the new timescales, if they were agreed as well, and what were the solutions or the reasons that the action was delayed, or what are we doing going forward as well. Another section that we have included in the report is the internal audit section. The overview and scrutiny committee isn't tasked with review of the internal audit section. However, as I said, this report goes through the senior management team as well, so they want to have a broader overview. If you're more interested in why some of the recommendations are falling off target, you're more than welcome to tune in into internal audit viewing on the 22nd of July. We also have sections on complaints and workforce. Monitoring of our complaints is very important for us because we want to learn from mistakes we've made, but also maybe there is some changes to the processes we can implement going forward that will improve our performance. And workforce, it has been mentioned already today, it's so very important. Everything we do within the council relies on our staff, so we want to make sure that we are well staffed and our staff are equipped to deal with the challenges that are put in front of them. So that's enough of theory, and now onto the report. So if I could ask you to move to the page 52 of the agenda, and we'll start with the performance indicators for housing operations. So as I've mentioned, we look at our performance indicators using the traffic light system, and so you can see very nice colorful map in here that tells us a story and shows the trends as well. the table that you see in the middle of the page is presented using certain columns. Each of the column will have a different function. So we have first column showing us the performance indicator reference number. That then is followed by the description. So you know what exactly we are trying to measure, and also indication on whether we are striving to make the indicator higher or lower as well. Because, for example, for number of voids, we are trying to decrease the amount of time for the relet, but maybe we want to increase the number of rent we are collecting as well. So at the end of the Q4, you can see that we have 3 of the indicators, indicator H5, so for the annual rent correction, and also the responsive repairs, couple of responsive repairs indicators which fall off target. As it has been mentioned today, the indicators that you're actually looking at and the performance is on the contractor which is outgoing at the moment. So we are hoping, and it has been stressed already with discussions with the new contractor, that we will carry out exactly, or kind of carry on with the same monitoring set going forward. So hopefully we're going to see more green in the coming year in the Q1 as well. Performance will improve. Although the annual rent collection is just slightly off target, shows in orange, there is no specific area of concern for us. If I could ask you to move on to page 53 at the very bottom of that page.
Can I just ask a question before you disappear off that slide? On H5, what, obviously in the Q1 there was only 24.9, but that's got a green, so obviously that's good. You obviously don't expect to get as much in. Then it goes to amber at 49. Then it goes back to green at 76. What percentage in Q1, 2 and 3 are you trying to achieve that green 24 was obviously good, even though it's low and it should be as high as we can get it, but 49 then becomes amber?
If you actually look at the description of the indicator, because we have the different targets for each of the quarters, and that is a cumulative figure. The Q1 our target will be 24.65%. So when we compare the Q1 performance,
right, yep.
So those targets are listed in the description.
I've got it. Thank you.
As this KPI is not a clear one, doesn't give a clear idea, so that's why we're actually proposing to actually scrap that one.
Right, yeah.
A clearer one, you can see straight away whether we're performing or not.
Yeah.
Because it does take a little bit of calculation.
Okay, thank you.
Coming back to the report, so page 53, if you look at the service plans, at the end of the financial year, all of the service plan objective has been delivered. We have marked a couple of objectives completed but slightly off track because they required a revised due date. So these have been also listed below for you to have a look at. If we move on to page 54, we look at the complaints. Housing, due to the nature of the business, has the highest amount of interaction with our customers. So actually the level of complaints that we receive is quite small in comparison. However, we want to improve our response rate. So there was a discussion at our senior management meeting already, and there will be a review of processes of level how we handle our level 1 complaints within each of the service areas. So we are hoping to improve that specific aspect going forward. There's no specific areas of concern with regards to workforce, quite healthy turnover as well, and we had few very successful appointments to the roles that we required. If we can move on now to page 57.
Sorry, can we just skip back to the service plan action status, the item at the top of page 54. The words in the right column don't seem to quite match the statement that it's completed. So it says the action has been carried forward while Surrey County Council proposals are confirmed and considered, which tends to suggest that you're still waiting for information to complete that action.
Yes.
So it's nearly completed, but not quite.
in terms of some decisions to be made, I think with the new administration still got to meet with the portfolio holders that are related to this issue before we can move forward.
So the effective action isn't completed yet?
No, but we have, it is moved forward to the new service plan this year.
Okay, so
yeah. So it hasn't been lost. It's not completed, but we haven't lost it.
sorry.
Going back to page 51, being the key lessons, there's a reference here to a case of Legionella in one of the senior living schemes. Is that someone caught in Legionella?
No. Legionella is the bacteria in the water.
Okay, well, it was a case of the water, it wasn't someone actually caught Legionella.
No,
the way it reads, without knowing about it, looks like someone actually caught Legionella, but
no.
very bad. Good. That's good.
Can I ask another question? It says Andrew at the bottom on page 56. At the top, your great success in the homelessness. And so in East Hampshire we have bed and breakfast in double figures nearly all the time. That if we're paying the deposits on private rented, at some stage of the time, do they pay that deposit back to you?
Yes.
That's all I wanted to know. It doesn't
yes.
sort of say that here.
No.
It just says there's been an increase in spending. That's lovely if we get it back. Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on to Andrew's area on page 57, we have a list of performance indicators, and as I said, some of the indicators will have very clear targets set against them, but sometimes we actually look at the data, and the data is very valuable to us as well, although we cannot set specific targets. And the members were very interested already in the homelessness and temporary accommodation, so this is the indicator H3 and H4A as well, that will be looking at those areas, so you will have actual information provided to you once a quarter. And as it has been mentioned, when we actually look at our figures compared to our district council within the Surrey, we are doing really, really well. There are other three quite important indicators: the number of affordable homes granted planning permissions, then we have a number of affordable homes with started on-site numbers and delivered as well. So it gives us really nice overview of the whole process, how many permissions were granted, how many then actually went into the next step as well. And although we cannot compare quarter on quarter, it gives us a picture of exactly the number of houses that we are looking at. And there's a little diagram as well at the bottom of the page showing that with the three major housing planning applications, we have achieved actually 30% of affordable housing as well, which is a good success. Moving on to the page 58. And at the bottom of the page we have service plans. So again, nearly all but one service plan actions were delivered on target, and the new revised date for the implementation of the Housing and Planning Act powers in private sector housing will be delivered by the end of September. That will be all from me. I'm sure that my head of service will be more than happy to provide a little bit more narrative for you.
Questions in relation to this? What is it?
In section 9, the housing strategy, there's only one performance indicator which has your rated on. I mean, is there anything else you can think of? I mean,
well, in terms of, I mean, you can't, really set a target for delivery of affordable homes with housing associations. You have no idea. You can set a target.
yes.
Well, we're not in control of that. We enable, we cajole, we manoeuvre, we try to get as many as we can, and it's useful to have the data. And I introduced the third performance indicator in terms of starts on site, because from planning permission to completion, you could get 0 on completions, yet we might have 150 on site. So it looks very bad, but actually it's not, because there's tremendous progress happening, but completions can be held up for all sorts of reasons. So to give, as Nora said, a good overview of the progress in affordable housing delivery, you've got those three indicators. we can't set targets for those because we do not control them. It's very difficult to set targets for how many new council homes we're going to build per annum, because we can be held up through planning, we can have not to get planning permission like Rye Road and Farnham, we could have awful issues on site assembly, things can be delayed within the contracts. So we can have a pipeline programme that we can present to the committee, which we do, but it's not realistic, sensible to set a target to say we are going to do 40 a year. We kind of have over the period of the service plan, because I'm thinking that's what I think we'll achieve. But there are so many things outside of our control, even in our own building, which means setting rigid targets is I don't think is very helpful. But the one thing that will be extremely serious is if H4A goes south. Because not only will it mean that we have more and more households in temporary accommodation, it means the council's bed and breakfast bill will go sky high. So that really is an extremely important indicator. We've set a target of 8 households. I don't know where that came from, but we try to keep it at 0.
So could I just ask a quick question in relation to the performance indicators telling us a story? Where we're looking at P7 tells number of affordable homes granted planning permission. Of course, what leaps out there is the 558, which I guess is Dunsfold. Is that, yeah. And yet, and then the next metric we've got is how, affordable housing started. But that, it seems to me there's an intermediate step there, because we know at Dunsfold actually none of them have got firm detailed planning permission.
No, it's
it could be any time in the next 15
Yes.
years that we get those.
Yes.
So we're sort of leaping from conceptually we're going to get 500 houses at some time during the next 15 years to what's already started. And I just wonder whether there's actually space somewhere in here for a metric which is number of houses that have been given firm planning permission, so that we know that
we could do, Chairman, we could do outline permission, and we could do sort of detailed consent.
Because then we know
we could
that's,
add another
we're going to
one.
get that in the next 3
Yes.
years, and it's that's much more meaningful
Yes.
to a
Yes.
group
I
like
think that
us.
would be- That would give a, it would give a
So
full ordered picture.
could we, yeah, I mean, you know, these reports only change sort of each year, the cycle, but if we could sort of bank that as a target maybe for the future, and maybe have that number brought to the committee separate to this, so that we are seeing genuinely where we're going. Because, you know, I know the new administration is very keen to get houses built, and you know, Dunsfold looks hugely impressive, but there's no guarantee we're going to see any of those houses during the term of this administration. So,
That's right, Chairman.
okay, thank you. Any more questions on this? Right, okay, because we're starting to get challenged for time, so thanks very much, Laura, really helpful. The next item is an invitation from the Value for Money ONS group to provide a participant in an ongoing piece of work that's how long it's been going now, at least a year I think. Quite a complex piece of work, and quite a demanding piece of work in terms of ability to get to grips with fairly detailed numbers, but equally a piece of work that's looking for inspiration in terms of finding ways for us to get on top of the financial challenges that the council has for the next 3 years. So we've been invited to nominate a representative from this committee to sit on a working group which will have members nominated from the other ONS groups to try and get to grips with the challenges. So, are there any volunteers or nominations for this?
I was wondering, I mean, I don't know how much discussion you want about this, since it's not quite as formal as a council meeting, but I was wondering if our vice chair, Mr. Councillor Marriott could take the job on, because I was thinking if he can cope with things going up in space, that the numerical problems might not be beyond him. But I don't know I really don't know whether you as chair want to do it, but I'd be very happy to nominate Councillor Marriott.
Could I point out, Chair, that we, at the Environment Panel, we were informed it doesn't have to be somebody who's numerically adept. It's purely a scrutiny working group, not, you don't have to, you know, be Carol Vorderman to be able to do it.
I would say I have served on, I served on that working group before, and you're right, it's not all about finances, it's actually about finding solutions, but equally a grasp of the numeric side of it, so that the solutions are grounded in what we can actually achieve with the money available is quite important.
So
I
problem solving,
but
and having a sense of reality.
It will be understanding where we are and then trying to find routes to get to where we need to be, so that the numbers all add up.
I think it's a misconception that people who do maths can add up numbers. But no, I'd be happy to take that on if anyone else would like to do it.
We were kicking this round earlier, and I arrived at a similar solution to you.
Well, then I'm happy to absolutely agree.
Are you all comfortable with that, or is there anyone else with a burning design? No?
Chairman, could I just ask the officers on page 63, and this is the kind of question I ask, on workstream 3, it says, a more holistic perspective to reduce silo service. Could you explain what a silo to me is something, you know, farmers have in their garden? What is a silo service?
Well, I mean, a silo is, and you can have rocket silos, individual container. So you have individual containers. So in a council you will have a number of services, and they sit in individual containers, and never the twain shall meet. And what you need to do is break down the silos so that housing and planning work closely together with environmental health, and the whole corporate drive of the council is teams working together to deliver services rather than in their separate containers.
Thank you, but I had to ask because it meant absolutely nothing to me. Thank you.
I'm so glad you did.
Well, there you are, you see.
No, not to that.
No, there you are, you see, so somebody has to ask a basic question, and thank you for the sensible answer.
Right, well, we got to the solution there very quickly. Thank you very much for volunteering. Or being volunteered and rising to the challenge. Right, so the last item of substance is the committee work programme. So we'll ask Yasmin to kick us off on this, and then we'll see where it leads us to.
Thank you, Chairman. So agenda item 13, you've got on page 65 of your agenda, you've got work programme criteria that we try and use to some extent to assess what comes onto the work programme and what you'll be looking at over the next few years. The briefing paper begins on page 67, so that's what I'd really like to draw your attention to. There are lots of important and interesting things that were sort of in effect left over from the previous committee that you're being asked to decide if you would like to continue to have on your work programme, and if so, at what point roughly you'd like to consider them. It is a flexible work programme, so things will pop up during the year or across the years that you think would be worth having on your work programme, but it's useful for officers to sort of get the picture early on, and then we can sort of work to those demands. So some of the things on the briefing paper have come out of previous pieces of work that the committee's done. Some of them are things that we're expecting to look at in the coming years or months. Some of them. So it's really up to the committee how it wants to take them, if it wants to include them on the work programme moving forward. Whether some of them are obviously all of them very interesting. Some of them might be better off in more sort of in-depth working groups, or perhaps even just as information to be delivered to the committee. So, for example, point 10 on page 69 perhaps is it's an update on, so talking to the chairman earlier, this is the sort of item that would lend itself to circulation for information as opposed to taking an agenda item on the actual committee, but that's up to the committee and officers may well have a view on that as well. So I'd like to just ask the committee to consider the points on there and to decide if it'd like to add them to its work programme, and if so when. I mean, I've got a rough deadline of a rough idea of the dates for these items, and we've got committee meetings. The next ones are in September, November, and then there will be 2 more before the end of the civic year. So I'm happy to sort of guide the committee into deciding when to have these items. I'm sure officers as well are more aware of the timescales for some of those pieces of work.
Mm-hmm.
Item 12 on the housing associations. Now, I don't suggest we have to discuss it here, but a briefing on the comparative role of housing associations and the council in providing accommodation would be useful. As I don't understand it,
Okay.
where the balance is. But I don't suggest it comes to committee. I think a paper would be, noting that would be useful.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. I have to say that most of these I thought, gosh, that would be interesting to know about. So I got sort of ticks against most of them. But I am concerned about our housing register. I know compared to other authorities, ours is probably not too bad, but we've got a lot of people there. So I'm concerned about the number of people who are actually being in private sector housing and how that impacts on the tenants themselves, how we can help them improve the situation. That's item 2.
Chairman, I'd like to have a slightly more regular update on the amount of housing association housing built, completed and filled, because having sat on the planning committee for the last 4 years, and as far as I can see, Cranley will have hundreds of houses in affordable, as it's usually 30% or something, and that was from 4 years ago. And they're being built everywhere I drive. There are, in Arfold or whatever it is, they're just going up. They must be completed fairly soon, some of them. And I think that would be quite nice to see, just even if it was just each time, how many housing associate, because we know how many of the council ones, because you keep us updated on that, but how many housing associate ones have been done, and how many from Waverley, where on the housing register or housing list, which is updated, that they have gone to, because I'm also assuming that with a housing association you could have a swap from mutual exchange.
Yes.
And we aren't aware of how many of those go to mutual exchange, because in this sort of area I would think quite a lot of people would like to mutually exchange down to Waverley.
Yes, it's the other way round.
Oh, the other way round?
No.
Oh.
It's the other way round. It's the problem, and the people don't want to leave Waverley. It's yes, people
well,
don't
exactly.
Mutually exchange.
And so that must put the back up.
I mean,
it would be quite interesting to see.
We could do a report. Obviously we have performance monitoring, which doesn't really tell you anything other than numbers. We could do a report on where and who, which housing associations delivered where and in which parts of the borough, etc., etc. We could do something on that.
Because I remember actually when we were doing the local plan, and the government inspector suddenly said we had to do 20 extra houses a year for London, and I remember saying to the inspector, once we've had 20 people from London moving down to Waverley, does that mean it stops? And of course everybody laughed, because you can't stop people moving from anywhere.
Not into market housing, no. But in terms of our affordable homes, then it's because our housing register is only for Waverley.
Yeah.
It's not an open register.
But is the mutual exchange that
Yeah, that's not that common,
Really?
Anna. No, not
Okay.
really. But we can bring. I mean, I think that's more a report, isn't
Yeah,
it, rather
okay.
than something you can really scrutinise, because it is what it is.
Okay.
But yes.
Okay. So,
Yes, well, I would like to suggest that we follow up number 4, which is housing and mental health. I'm not quite sure, well, I think what's been suggested is that we have a presentation from another organisation. I think mental health is actually a huge concern, and it's much more out in the open these days than it used to be. I don't know if the officers had any particular organisation in mind who could come and, at the very minimum, do a presentation. But actually I'm quite concerned about, because I have been involved in mental health on the Surrey link not that long ago. Surrey Link was a sort of critical friend of the NHS provision in Surrey County Council's area. I think that where people aren't housed, it can cause mental health problems. And if they're housed in the wrong place, of course, it can cause mental health problems. But there are also the question of sheltered housing for people who have mental illness and cannot really be relied upon to live on their own. And I know that there are parents in the borough who have children who are now adult with mental health difficulties. And the parents have said to me, what is going to happen to my child when I've gone? So I think there's quite a lot of aspects to this mental health business.
yes, I would totally agree with that, and I think that there's a very strong linkage with that and item 14, which Andrew was interested in us exploring, the review of the housing allocations policy. So a subset of allocations will be to people who have mental health issues. And so if we don't understand what the issues are, what the range of issues are before we embark on anything relating to the policy, then we're going to be selling ourselves short.
Exactly.
So I think there's a linkage there. And even the item 3, the affordable housing, again, what is the right kind of affordable housing to provide to people who have mental health challenges? Where should it be? So I think there's quite a lot of linkage in this long list that we've got. And I know we were talking about this beforehand, and Councillor Marriott was very keen to have a more integrated thinking about the way we're doing things. So we don't have a long list of 16 things here. We actually have some key themes that we can integrate to get greater depth. So I'm entirely supportive. I think we do need this housing and mental health in front of us quickly, so that we can understand what the issues are, so that we can take that understanding to other things that we're doing as an integrated part, rather than it's a problem in the corner. Actually, no, it's not. It's a challenge for us to get on top of and work with officers to make some recommendations.
I mean, that Chairman, is a big piece of work, and it will cut across work I do with my community's hat on, community harm and risk management meeting, where multi-agency meeting where we're dealing with individuals in the borough who are causing antisocial behaviour or causing difficulties to themselves and others, almost all with some kind of mental health. And our tenancy estates officers are helping people sustain their tenancies who have mental health. It is an increasing problem. It is a very big area. It's a bit like when I was doing the rust on my old Austin Maxi. You scrape one bit to put your filler in. Do you remember those days when your cars used to rust? And then actually it's very, very big, this. So I think the committee, I would just counsel, if we're going to do this, it's a big piece of work, and it brings in, and we need to bring in other agencies to help us, specialist housing associations, etc.
Chair, and also the impact on universal credit, that can have how long it takes for new applicants to receive their universal credit, and especially with those that are dealing with mental health issues, if they've got no support and they're not very IT savvy because everything has to be online, that can cause issues as well.
So I think what I'm hearing here is a will to tackle it, but a challenge that this is not.
I mean, it's
I may be
extremely
slightly
important, Chairman,
yeah.
very, and increasingly so, for both Hugh and I, in the work we do in terms of tenants, homelessness, etc., socially excluded groups, the whole mental health housing issue is very big.
So can I suggest to the committee that we ask Andrew to go away and come back at our next meeting with a proposal for pulling together something structured that's more than just...
as long as I can have Yasmin to help.
Support that.
Are you okay with that?
Yes,
yes, obviously, we've always got to bear in mind when we're asking for this work that it requires resources, and if we're taking resources, other stuff's not getting done. But
can we really bear in mind what outcome we're looking for? Because what you've opened is a complete can of worms. You could spend an entire year on it and not have any outcomes. And really, that wouldn't be valuable then. So you probably, when you've got an elephant to eat, you need to pick up a chunk, don't you?
yeah, which is why we're saying go away, think about it, and come back with something that is going to lead us to a better place in terms of how we as a committee recommend.
Verging on what county do, aren't we, in terms of their social services provision there as well? It does start creeping into that area.
It does, and that's why I say, you know, it is like the rust on the old Austin Maxi. You scrape one bit and you find so many other things. So we will need to be focused on what we look at, and particularly in helping our tenants with mental health maintain their tenancies. I think is a really important aspect. Will help our team officers.
That would shape it a bit.
It would shape it, and also how we work to find suitable accommodation for those with increasing mental health needs, which is my area. So just immediately I'm thinking about these two areas that Hugh and I are responsible for, which we would really value working with the committee on. But Yasmin and I can... I'll put her name first.
Could I perhaps suggest for a brief presentation on the bidding system, because it's something. I had an inquiry from a resident last week and I struggled actually to remember the bidding system in any detail, so I don't know whether other people might be interested to have just a brief paper or a brief presentation.
Is that something that fits into the September informal session?
Yes.
Yes.
You can do that.
Yeah.
So, just briefly, the discussion the Chair and I had earlier on, I was looking to see where the action items in your strategic housing document.
Oh, you probably haven't got the action plan, have you there, Peter? There's a big action plan that goes with that.
Yeah. How does that figure in our discussions? And this list of items, the rolling over items, is just one element of all this.
Well, the next meeting in September, you'll have the annual progress review for the housing strategy. It's a living document and it can change, and it may be when the committee scrutinises that report, there may be things that you want to add to it and help shape the strategy that goes through its 5 years, because it's not fixed. It can. That's why we review it every year, and it goes through ONS, into exec and into council, so that we can make changes, because with government policy you never know what's going to happen. We might suddenly get loads more grants, which is going to completely change the way we do things. So it is a living document. So that will, I think, launch a discussion on how we want to reprofile those objectives.
Can I suggest that that's sort of a two-way process in terms of this committee looking at the strategy and suggesting changes to that, but also the strategy shaping the work of the committee as well. So that's a sort of two-way link there, the process to sort of rationalise the work programme and future work.
Right, okay, so in terms of turning this list into a work programme, I don't think I'm hearing from anyone that there's anything. I'm assuming everyone's read it, had a quick look, and like me struggled to prioritise it. There was nothing on here I felt like I wanted to get rid of. It's all here for a good reason. And the other point is that it is a living document, so if in 6 months' time we think, well, that's been sitting on the work programme and we don't need to do it, we can throw it out any time. So, yes, okay, so there's one item that Yasmin needs to review for us, 15.
So number 15, review of value for money achieved through the housing service kitchen to bathrooms contract.
What page is that?
Sorry,
It's
on
page 71.
71.
Have you got the latest?
That's right, yes.
The newspapers that
Was
were
it?
here.
Okay.
Have you got the
No, I haven't paid
Sorry, so, yes, thank you, 71. So this was something suggested by the previous, actually, Value for Money Customer Service ONS committee. I think perhaps the committee didn't say no to it, they held on to it because obviously it's an important thing that we get value for money out of our contracts. But having discussions with the chair and vice chair and the actual committee yesterday, and with Hugh, who obviously looks after housing operations, the feeling was that such a review would be more valuable later on when the contracts have actually been bedded down a little bit more, and we'd be able to assess the value for money from the contracts and the management of the contracts, and we'd be in a much better place to do that, especially as so the exercise of procuring the contracts is an exercise in achieving value for money in the contracts anyway. So that's, I just wanted to draw your attention. It says here that officers will provide an update. So that's what I'm doing and saying that it's something that the Value for Money committee are alive to, and appreciate very much that it's completely sits across the two ONS committees, the Value for Money side of it and obviously the housing side of it. So it may be in 9 months, a year's time that it's something that gets picked up again, but it's not suggested for scrutiny anytime soon. If that covers that.
Right, okay, so we've got a list of 16 items here. We've agreed that all of them will have a place during the course of the year. Some of them should be informal, others, it's been suggested, should be by report and discussion at committee only by exception rather than presentation. So I think Yasmin is on top of all of that. Timings, a lot of them actually have sort of natural timings that will lend themselves to sorting out when we discuss things. So I'm reasonably confident that Yasmin can knock this into shape. Are you comfortable?
Yes, I am.
Volunteering
Yes.
you to do that?
Absolutely.
Right.
That's my job.
There was one item that we discussed when we had a pre-meeting in terms of getting started on working groups, so doing work outside the committee, which is a great way of learning how to do things in depth. It's a great way of getting to know the officers and understand what's really on their minds. And the suggestion was that we could probably kick off fairly quickly the review of the housing allocations policy, because it is important. Having said that, there are some resource challenges just in terms of the timing.
Yes, there are.
Do you want to guide us as to?
Yes, I mean, we're looking at, as part of our business transformation strategy, one of the areas that is being looked at now is the housing options team and how we can streamline that team, make necessary savings. And so Mike Rivers, our housing needs manager, is very much involved in working with Annie and myself and the business transformation manager and finance to do that work. And so I would ask the committee please not to launch that review of the allocations policy before November, because there would not be officer resource to make that really effective before then. I think that's and we want to do a thoroughly good job of this, well as we do with anything, but we will need quite extensive input from the senior officers in the housing office team.
Right, so I think we're suggesting that be done as a working group. So if you're interested in that, please bank that as something to volunteer for in November. And I think that relates to item 3 on the work programme, the affordable housing as well, because you're doing a review of that, and that's about determining what the need is for housing, and then if we've got the housing, how are we going to allocate it? That's item 14. So is it going to be possible to bring the affordable housing work to the committee by November? I mean, it's
3.
item 3.
So that's something I've had discussions with the housing strategy enabling and housing strategy enabling team, Alice and Esther. So I know they're doing a whole host of work on affordable housing, working with housing associations. So that was sort of number 3 is on there to. So obviously we talked a lot about affordable housing this evening. Sort of put it in the committee's consciousness that affordable housing is something that is of interest and within the remit of the committee. But as you say, it's definitely linked to a good understanding of affordable housing and need is obviously linked and underpins the allocation policy itself. So I would say that yes, they are linked, and it's important to have an understanding of that.
What about looking at different models for delivery of housing as well? So that's something that's going on in the background.
Yes.
Probably do the commentary.
We could include that in that, yes. So I would think we can certainly bring something to the committee sooner rather than later on that. But will, as Yasmin says, begin to form the basis of actually looking at the housing register and how we allocate social housing and to whom. And I know that Annalisa has had done a lot of thinking about actually who is the register for, who are we building homes for, who should go on the register, and actually going right back to basics to look at that is really a vital part of when we review the allocations policy. So again, that's why I think these will work. Very, very important.
Yes, okay. Are you comfortable that you can construct something to keep us out of trouble for the next year? Bearing in mind it's all flexible. Right. So there was one other item. Annie was suggesting, I think at the mayor making, that it would be a very good idea that we actually got out and looked at some of our social housing to energise us.
Sorry, I was just separate from that, but well, it's linked. So obviously, yes, looking at social housing actually in the flesh is an important part of sort of bringing to life what you do in this committee. So we will be looking to arrange something in the summer. But then we've also discussed already this evening about having an introductory session to housing and ONS's role in that. So I've been working with the officers to think about what it might be useful in that session for you to get to grips with and understand in terms of the housing service. So these are a few things that we thought would be a good basis. The list is slowly increasing, so it's important to remember that it will have a finite length of time. We won't keep you in there for too long, hopefully. But we did want to make sure that it's reactive to your needs as well. So if there's something you feel that there's a gap in your knowledge or understanding about something in particular, and we've already picked up a few things that hopefully we can address with items in the future. But this session would be sort of half a day to speak with the officers in a much more informal setting to get to grips with some of these things on the screen. So you could either, if you've got suggestions, please do let us know either now or as we get closer. I put the date up there. That's the date that we sort of is floating around for this session. But I will I'm out of tomorrow, but this week send digital invitations so that you can have those in your diary to look forward to. But yeah, we're happy to receive any suggestions for additional things, and we'll have to work to make that not too heavy, I think, on that day.
And then the other item was trying to get out and actually see some of our numerous success stories, because there's nothing like it to energise you. This looks good, something to be proud about, but actually our challenge is to make it even better. there are some places we can go in the borough where you'll actually be challenged to produce better social housing than we've done. Just down the road in Godalming we've got some outstanding ones. But I hope that will be of interest to people. Do holler if I'm having a bright idea that's not that bright. But, I know what worked for me.
I was going to say, could I start off at some time, if you could let me know, we know we've got roughly 5,000 council houses, how many housing association houses there are, so that we, with all the new build, we'll know how many affordable housing people there are within Waverley, because I haven't got a clue.
No, I can find that for you, Ali, yes. Yeah, I mean,
Just-
yes, I mean, there may be some that we're just not aware of, but I think we have a 90% chance of getting the right number.
Yeah, I think we've got it on
Yeah, we've got a number. Yeah, we can find that for you easily.
Could I just say that maybe we shouldn't just look at all the successes. I mean, yes, very inspirational, but I went to Sandy Hill Estate some time ago and wasn't quite what I would aspire to have in Waverley. I don't know, it's some time ago, so maybe we might consider reminding ourselves of what more we need to achieve.
Well, a trip up to Oxford Bridge, I think we've still got quite a few properties there which are due to be updated, and they date from the 30s.
I think, Christine, Sandy Hill is not council property.
Is it
Houses-
not?
Housing
no.
association.
So
Oh,
there's very
dear.
little you can really do about that. We don't really have any authority. Sandy Hill does come up and various sort of tenant aspects, and I think it's Visit now that manages it, I think, and I have sometimes contacted their housing managers, but I don't think that's nothing, in that sense, nothing to do with Waverley.
That's the estate in my patch, that's the Sandy Hill Council Estate, that's in the Upper Hale ward.
Yes.
But it's a good example of an old style council estate, and if you want to walk around, I'm happy to host you and take you around, if anybody wants to do that. So.
70% of it is actually private.
I was going to say, you see now, under the right to right, you know, how much of it is.
Yeah, no, it's 70%
What was-
because I used to be
yeah.
the housing officer for that.
Yeah, right.
Oh.
And those are the sort of statistics that actually make things,
Yeah.
then I learn to understand what proportion are council tenants, what proportion aren't, what a housing association, what now aren't. Because you look at where I am, people always say up at the council estate, but actually, apart from very few, it's not. Apart from now, if we redo the garages, they will be council houses. But, so much is privately owned.
I mean, getting back to the original point, I think it is a good point. I think if we go, I'm thinking of Oxford Bridge because that's just very live and very big. And I was dwelling on the success, but you're right. It's the opportunity to see where we started from as well, which is, I think, your point. And we should have in the back of our minds what is the minimum standard that's acceptable.
Absolutely.
That we want to.
I just make it controversial.
Yeah.
It may not be a council estate belonging to Waverley, but you're a scrutiny panel and you have a right to call people before you.
So the housing associations, yeah.
You have that right. They don't necessarily have to come.
No.
But you can scrutinise them. It may not make you very popular, but you can pose the question.
Yeah. Well, we're
So
not
don't
here
be
to
afraid.
we're not here to be popular. We're here to
No,
be
no,
different.
don't be
So
afraid
it's-
of posing the question if you feel that there's something for your community. You are the elected representatives. You are the democratic voice. You represent the people in any form of tenure. We're concentrating on housing, on council housing here, but you represent everyone in every form of
Yes.
tenure. You're the democratic voice. So don't be afraid to say to somebody, actually, we want to talk to you about that. Go for it.
So there's something in there about the housing associations, isn't there? So maybe if we use that as a trigger to consider a piece of work looking at.
I'm sorry, Chairman, but I presume the people who are going to go into social rented housing association have to come off our list.
Yes, generally, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes. So we have,
So we are in
there is
control.
some kind of relationship
Yeah.
because we're using our housing register.
Gosh, I suddenly thought for a minute we weren't.
Should we call it an evening?
Yes.
Thank you so much,
Sorry.
everybody. That was live. I found it productive. I think we're going to work together well.
If you just